I've entitled my message this morning, Testing in Times of Drought. Charles Haddon Spurgeon tells a story about his grandfather. He had a large family and a very small income, but he loved his Lord, and he would not have given up his preaching of the gospel for anything, not even for an imperial crown. He had told me often how the Lord provided for him. He had a little farm to get his living upon, and he had a cow which used to give milk for his many children. And one day when he came up to the cow, it fell back with a stagger and died. Grandmother said, "James, how will God provide for our dear children now? What shall we do for milk?" "Mother," he said, "God said he would provide, and I believe he could send us 50 cows, if he pleased." It so happened that on that day, a number of gentlemen were meeting in London. Persons whom he did not know were sitting as a committee for the distribution of money to poor ministers, and they had given it all who had asked for it. My grandfather had never asked for any. He liked to earn his own money. He did not send it to any petition for appeal. Well, after the gentleman had distributed all who had asked, there was £5 left over, and they were considering what they should do with this balance. Well, said one, "There's a Mr. Spurgeon down at Stambourne in Essex, a poor minister. He stands in need of £5. Oh, said another, "Don't send him £5. I will put 5 to it." "I know him," he says. "He's a worthy man." "No," said another, "don't send him £10. I will give another £5 if somebody else will put 5 other." The next morning came a letter to grandmother for 9 pence to pay. Grandmother did not like to pay 9 pence for a letter, but there was £20 in it. And as my grandfather opened it, he said, "Now can't you trust God about an old cow?" Our text this morning brings to light the very truth of a faithful God who provides for us even when we are experiencing times of drought. In the beginning of chapter 17, we are introduced to the prophet Elijah. We know very little about this man's background or his call to be a prophet, but he was a man sent from God. He was to become God's chosen instrument to bring a rebellious, sinful nation back to their knees. From this passage, we can see 3 tests that are evident. The test of faithful instruction, the test of first impression, and the test of physical impossibilities. The first test of faithful instruction. Sometime later, the brook dried up because there had been no rain in the land. Then the word of the Lord came to him, "Go at once to Zarephath in the region of Sidon, and stay there. I have directed a widow there to supply you with food." So he went to Zarephath. Let me highlight 2 truths I want to draw from this point. First, God has not lost track of you. Sometimes feel that God has lost track of us, don't we? But he hasn't. Next, he is aware of how painful the travel may be. So he knew what the travel was going to be like for Elijah from Zarephath to where the brook was to. He knew that. And God has not misplaced you this morning. The brook was getting smaller and smaller. Perhaps Elijah's faith was drying up as the brook disappeared. Elijah couldn't help but think of those back home that were affected by the prophetic announcement. And for anybody who doesn't know this, Elijah was a prophet who had declared that there would be no rain for many years. God had instructed him to try to bring back the children of Israel back to a loving God and bring them back to his command again. And he had commanded Elijah to go and say that there will be no rain. And there was no rain. So the brook was getting smaller and smaller and smaller because there was no rain. And it caused Elijah to even think about those at home who had been affected because of the drought. Had the town well run dry? As the brook dried up, perhaps the souls of his family dried unto death. Verse 8 offers volumes of hope when you were sitting by the dry stream bed. Then the word of the Lord came to me. The word of hope is this: God knows where you are. It is easy to think that in the busyness of all God has going on, that maybe he has misplaced us in the grand scheme of things. Worse yet, that our world is somehow unworthy of his involvement. I think the second one is where most of us struggle. We live in a world that don't care. It seems like everywhere you turn, people have lost that vigor for Christ, that vigor for God. Truth is something that is second nature, and it's not something that a man or a woman lives by these days. We live in a world that is very unworthy, so we think, of God's love, but God still loves us, doesn't He? God always loves us as children. I wonder this morning, what are you going through in these days? Is there sickness or death knocking at your door? It seems like everywhere we turn, many are suffering from that dreadful disease of cancer. Oftentimes we still feel so helpless. We feel defeated when we hear the word, don't we? We wonder and we fear that if we have that dreadful disease, it's finished. We're done for. Maybe you're here this morning and there are situations in one of your relationships. Maybe there is the stress of family. It seems impossible to overcome the strain we feel in that relationship, and you believe that the relationship will never be restored. Maybe you are here this morning and you have financial concerns. You're not sure where the next dollar is coming from. You're always fearful of the tax collector or the next collector who may call or knock at the door. I have no idea this morning what you're going through. Many people are private and they don't say what they're going through at times. But it doesn't matter this morning what the concerns you may be facing. I believe that there are times we feel like Elijah had been when he sat by that brook and it was dried up. We feel helpless and all alone. We feel that God has forgotten us. Those of us here this morning, and those who may be listening to this broadcast, can rely on God's promise that He will never leave us nor forsake us this morning. It is when we feel that the brook is drying up and everything is changing, that is when God would like us to rely on Him and not ourselves. He is a God who always provides. And we studied that a couple weeks ago in Bible study, didn't we? He's a God who always provides. How painful the travel must have been from the brook to Zarephath. It was 100 miles of misery and pain. These were days when the sound of celebration was replaced with the sound of funeral cries. Death filled the land. With every step he took, Elijah was accurately aware of his role in the centerpiece of the drama that was unfolding. Not only was Ahab looking for Elijah, all of Israel was looking for him as well, because the prophet had caused so much pain. But God was with Elijah. He had not forgotten him. God was in control. The test of first impressions. When he came to the town gate, a widow was there sitting gathering sticks. He called her and asked, "Would you bring me a little water in a jar, that I may have a drink?" She was going to get it, and he called, "And bring me a piece of bread." "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in the jug. I am gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat it and die." That's verse 10 to 12. Elijah's journey had finally ended. He had arrived at his destination, the Gentile city of Sidon, on the Mediterranean coast. This was the home of Jezebel, found in 1 Kings 16:31. From this verse we learn another important truth. God knows where you are and where you're going. Elijah didn't know what would happen after he left the brook. We don't know what will happen in our future, but God knows, and that's all that matters. We don't need to worry about the future, right? And sometimes we spend hours and days concerned about what's going to happen tomorrow, what's going to happen next week, what's going to happen in months down the road. But we need to rely on God, because God has those things planned for us. It's all in His control. And nothing about worrying or any of our concerns can bring and change any of that. God is in control of our lives. We have to be responsible to God for everything that we do. What a way to meet someone. Think about it. For this first time, Elijah arrives in Sidon, and he finds himself talking to this widow, picking up sticks. And it's the very woman that God has sent Elijah to. It's not long after Elijah first sees this woman that he asks her for a drink of water. Even in this time of drought, his request for a drink of water was an easy one for her to fulfill, as it was customary for her to fulfill that request. What was Elijah doing in such an impossible situation? Elijah was the all-sufficient prophet from Gilead, If he stood before kings, God would humble him by using this weak, frail widow to be his supply. The crucible's fire is being ignited. What is God trying to teach us through this widow? W. Philip Keller says she was apparently too poor to procure fuel for herself from the dealers of the town. So she had no money. She couldn't go to the dealers of the town and actually ask them for fuel to cook this bread. So she had to go into the town herself and pick up sticks and try to cook this bread. So in shame and humility, she had gone into the country to collect the sticks to collect what sticks she could to fuel the last bar she thought she would ever make for herself. It was the end of her and her son. Elijah's drought had done its deadly deed. The famine had finished off her family. This was the termination of the tortuous path she had trod in life. Elijah ended up in front of the neediest person God could direct him to, one that had suffered under the consequences of Elijah's drought. God expected Elijah to rely on her to have his needs met. James 1:27 tells us that religion that God our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this, to look after orphans and widows in their distress. Why does this type of Christianity please God? Because orphans and widows can offer nothing in return. This was true of Elijah's widow. All she had was a little flour and some oil. Despite this, Elijah made his request of her and was now relying on her to provide him food. The test of physical possibilities. We have no idea if this woman knew of Elijah before their encounter, but she knows of his God. She replies to Elijah's request for bread like this: "As surely as the Lord your God lives, I don't have any bread, only a handful of flour in a jar and a little olive oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat and die." I love Elijah's response to her concern, though. Elijah said to her, "Don't be afraid. Go home and do as I have said. But first, make a small cake of bread for me from what you have and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son. For this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says: For the jar of flour will not be used up, the jug of oil will not run dry, until the day the Lord gives rain on the land." Verse 13 and 14. I wonder this morning, what would be our response to the request of Elijah? There's a statement that says that the olive oil and the flour will not run out. If we were in the same situation in this world this morning, what would be our response to Elijah? Here you have this man that you've never met before, asking you to go home and meet his need before you meet the need of yourself and your son. You have already told this man that you have physically only enough flour to make a cake of bread for you and your son before you go home and die. That's basically it. She has nothing else to offer. Everything else is drying up. But here's Elijah asking her to make him something to eat first before she feeds her son and herself. The widow stops in her tracks. She couldn't believe what she's hearing. Bring water from the village well was one thing, but she had an empty barrel of flour and a jar that needed to be a spatula to scrape the remnant of the oil that had almost evaporated. She must have felt put out by the request, because she protested immediately. "As surely as the Lord your God lives," she replied, "I don't have any bread." Elijah is asking her to exhaust all her resources. It would only lead to one result: death. There you have it, the Christian life summed up in the truth. In one truth: God wants us to exhaust all of our resources, and this very request may lead to death. The Apostle Paul knew this truth when he wrote, "I have been crucified with Christ, and no longer I that live, but Christ who lives in me." Galatians 2:20. Have you discovered the victory that comes with allowing God to have it all? It is the most liberating way to live. God wants to press upon you the need to use your resources, even if they seem like such a small amount. Mark my words, God will come and call the need to use your resources over and over again as you serve Him. If you refuse, you will be out of flour and oil. If you release him to his purpose, you will never lack. She went away and did as Elijah told her. So there was food every day for Elijah, for the woman and her family. For the jar of flour was not used up, and the jug of oil did not run dry. In keeping with the word of the Lord spoken by Elijah, found in verse 15 to 16. Don't panic, friend. Don't worry. The Lord can and will supply the flour and oil that is needed for your provision. This was Elijah's powerful and positive response to a doubting generation. This was a faith in action. This comes only when we have an unshakable confidence in God, his character, knowing that he always keeps his promises. What is it God is asking you for this morning? Is he asking you to give more of yourself? Does God want you to give more of your financial resources? Let me assure you this morning that you cannot outgive God. I've proved this time and time again that when we give with free hearts to God, we are blessed beyond measure. I wonder, are you here this morning and you feel helpless and all alone? Maybe you experienced the faithfulness of God in the past. But as you look at the emptying jar of oil and the barrel of flour that seems to be running out, you're wondering where to turn to. Let me encourage you this morning to look no further. Christ is here. He will provide for your needs. All you need to do is seek him. There will always be the seasons of drought, but Christ is the living water, and he always provides this morning. Always provides.